In the last 10 years, the UFC has grown massively. The popularity of combat sports has gone through the roof, with the MMA receiving more attention than ever before. But sometimes, controversial events have completely changed the UFC, which is the biggest MMA promotion. Now in this video, we're going to talk about the top controversial UFC moments of the decade. First off, at number 8, we have Colby Covington insulting Brazil. Did you know that Colby Covington, who's now a very outspoken fighter, was barely noticed before? By the end of 2017, he had beaten a serious contender, Dong Hyun Kim. However, he was still the forgotten man of the welterweight division because of his fighting style and his lack of character. When Covington went to Sao Paulo, Brazil to fight Brazilian legend Demian Maia, everything changed. Chaos may have had his best fight ever against the veteran, but it was his post-fight rant that made him one of the most well-known fighters in the UFC. Covington called Brazil a dump and said that the fans in Sao Paulo were all filthy animals. This caused the crowd to boo and throw trash at him as he went backstage. The former great wrestler also refused to apologize when people tried to make him. Instead, he apologized to filthy animals for saying that they were like the people of Sao Paulo. In the end, the UFC had to send security to Covington's hotel to protect him from the angry locals. Because of safety concerns, the UFC also had to change his plans for a fight between Covington and Rafael dos Anjos in 2018. Since then, Covington has embraced his outspoken personality, starting from that very controversial speech he made in Brazil, which made him the most hated person in Sao Paulo. At number 7, we have the UFC 178 press conference brawl. The first fight between UFC light heavyweight champion Jon Jones and his bitter rival Daniel Cormier didn't happen due to an injury Jones sustained before UFC 178 in September 2014. During a press conference for UFC 178, two light heavyweight rivals got into a fight after staring each other down. Before this press conference, we had seen a lot of heated stare-downs with the occasional push or headbutt, but none of them had turned completely violent. In this case, however, Cormier didn't like how Jones was leaning his head too far forward, so he pushed the champion. Bones, who took the rivalry very seriously, decided to throw a bunch of punches at DC, which made him fall backwards before the two men went flying off the side of the stage. During the chaos, UFC executive Dave Scholler fell off the back of the stage and into a backdrop. Even when the fight was over and the fighters were finally apart, Cormier threw his shoe at Jones, missing his target and hitting a reporter instead. The incident is still the only time a pre-fight press conference got physical, and even though neither man was hurt, it's still one of the most controversial things to happen in the UFC. At number 6, we have Paul Daly's sucker punch. Dana White, the president of the UFC, has been known to throw his fighters under the bus. But if he thinks they can help his business, he's always willing to bury the hatchet. But in 2010, the UFC kicked out one fighter, and White has been true to his word and never brought him back. When Paul Semtex Daly fought Josh Koscheck at the UFC 113 semi-main event, he was close to getting a shot at the welterweight title. The winner of the fight was supposed to fight the champion, George St. Pierre. However, in this fight, it was the grappler Koscheck who won. Daly didn't like the way Koscheck fought, and almost certainly didn't like what Koscheck said after the fight. So as Koscheck was celebrating, Daly rushed him from behind and hit him with a shameful sucker punch. The referee quickly held him back, but the damage was already done, at least to Daly's UFC career. Before Daly, no one had ever attacked their opponent after the final buzzer. MMA has always been based on respect between martial artists and professional athletes, and this went against everything that the sport stood for. So it wasn't a surprise that Daly was let go right away and hasn't been back since. Next up at number 5, we have the UFC 229 post-fight brawl. When Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov fought for Nurmagomedov's UFC lightweight title in October 2018, their feud was already at a boiling point, but nobody could have predicted the controversy that happened after the fight. The fight ended in the 4th round when the Eagle put a neck crank on the Notorious One and made him tap out. However, it seems that making the Notorious One tap out wasn't enough for the Eagle, who had been insulted by the Notorious One before the fight. So, Khabib climbed over the octagon fence and attacked McGregor's training partner, Dylan Dennis, from the crowd. As security tried to separate Nurmagomedov and Dennis, chaos broke out. McGregor got into a fight with two of Nurmagomedov's cornermen, UFC fighters Abubakar Nurmagomedov and Zabira Turkagov, and they all started throwing punches at each other. Even though the fight ended, the situation was so bad that UFC president Dana White wouldn't give Nurmagomedov his title belt. In the end, everyone involved in the controversial incident was suspended for long periods of time by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. The UFC was left with a black eye after its own version of Strikeforce's famous Nashville Brawl in 2010. At number 4, we have Conor McGregor's bus attack. The feud between Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov reached its peak when one of the most controversial and shameful moments in UFC history. Nurmagomedov was going to fight Max Holloway for the Open UFC lightweight title at UFC 223 in Brooklyn, New York. Before the event, the Eagle and some of his teammates decided to talk to McGregor's training partner, Artem Lobov, about some comments he'd made about a possible Khabib-McGregor fight. McGregor and some of his teammates immediately flew to Brooklyn. After a press conference, they went to the Barclays Arena and attacked a bus carrying Nurmagomedov, 2 of his teammates, and many other UFC fighters who were supposed to fight on the card. Al La Quinta, who was on the bus, thought the event was so shocking that it was like a terrorist attack. The fight got really bad when McGregor threw a metal dolly at the bus and broke a window. Lobov was immediately taken off the card, and both Michael Chiesa and Ray Borg had to pull out of their fights because they were hurt in the attack. McGregor was charged with 3 counts of assault and 1 count of criminal mischief. Before this fight, no feud in the UFC had ever led to a straight-up crime, which is why this was by far the most controversial event of the decade. At number 3, we have Brock Lesnar allowed fighting at UFC 200. If you're a professional fighter coming out of retirement, you have to tell the UFC and its drug testing partner, the United States Anti-Doping Agency, 4 months ahead of time, unless the UFC tells you not to. That was the mistake made by heavyweight Brock Lesnar, who's coming back to MMA after being away for more than 4.5 years. Brock Lesnar came back to fight Mark Hunt at UFC 200, but it's hard to understand how the UFC or USADA let him into the octagon when he seemed to be under the influence. It was unfair that Hunt had to fight a monster like Lesnar, who was much stronger than him. At number 2, we have Nick Diaz getting suspended. Nick Diaz failed a drug test after his fight with Anderson Silva at UFC 183. He was shocked to be suspended for 5 years. He also had to pay a large fine of $165,000. When you think about how some fighters get away with using steroids, Diaz's suspension was one of the strangest things an athletic commission has ever done. The Stockton native's sentence was later cut to 18 months, but because he couldn't pay the $165,000 fine, the man from Stockton wasn't allowed to compete. Later, the 38-year-old and the NCAS came to a deal, and he was allowed to fight. Diaz hasn't fought in the octagon for more than 6 years despite all of this. Finally, at number 1, did you know that UFC 232 moved to a new location because of Jon Jones? Jon Jones tested positive for drugs again before his match against Alexander Gustafsson at UFC 232, which was his first fight after being suspended. The UFC tried to keep things under control in its own way. Jones did not get a license from the NSAC, but the California State Athletic Commission did, so UFC moved the whole thing from Nevada to California, and they did it quickly. The event, which was supposed to happen on Saturday at the T-Mobile Arena, will now take place at The Forum in Inglewood, California. Even with the change, all 26 of the fights are still expected to happen. A drug test Jones gave earlier this month had an unusual result, which was found by a USADA test. Jones tested positive for M3 metabolite before his last fight against Daniel Cormier at UFC 214 in July 2017. The test showed traces of it in his system. Even though he won, the decision was overturned, and the fight was called a no contest after it was found that Jones had a positive drug test. That's all for this video. Which moment did you find the most controversial? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more exciting content in the future. Thanks for watching. See you next time.